Welcome to Wilsonart Training Centre. My name's Paul Graham. Today I'll be going through the guidelines and techniques of our Earthstone product, which will be a comprehensive guide through installation, finishing and maintenance of our product.
The tools you'll need to work with the Earthstone range of products are almost identical to those that you use with normal laminates. The only specialist tool that you will need with this product is a random orbital sander. Belt sanders should be avoided.
We are now set up to do the connecting bolts as you would do with any other worktop. We are ready to apply 2 biscuit joints, which is done with a jointer machine and biscuits to be inserted, which is number 20. If you haven't got a sharp router bit in your router, what could happen, instead of a clean cut, you'll have a ragged cut. This being where chipboard is being pulled instead of cut. That is why you do a dry fit. If a dry fit leaves a gap, it's advisable just to get some sandpaper, keeping away from the sharp edge, just to clean off any rags that might be there. Now we're ready to join the 2 worktops, and what we do to do that is we use a 2-part seam adhesive, which is formulated and colour matched for this material. Because it's a 2-part resin, it needs to be purged. Both glue and the seam adhesives come out of the nozzle at the same rate. Now you've got the hardener coming through at the same rate as the colour. Attach the nozzle small to small, in and twist, and now you're ready to glue. The glue has got a curing time of anything between 10 and 20 minutes depending on the temperature. If it's warmer inside, it'll go off quicker. If you're outside or working in a garage, the glue will take longer to cure. What we have got to do is clean the joints, be it the mason's mitre, or if you've got to put end caps on, you must clean it off with denatured alcohol. This will get rid of any dust or debris that you may have in the joints. If you fail to do so, what could happen is that you'll have a brown line. That brown line will show up in the glue, which will be a dust line, and it is all because you haven't cleaned it with your denatured alcohol.
When dry fitting of the joint has been completed, it's been deragged and cleaned, apply the adhesive in a long bead, applying it to all surfaces, into any biscuit joints, and also making sure that the bead of adhesive runs down into the joint. Push together and check for a really good squeeze out to help create an inconspicuous joint.
What we need to do now, guys, is because the glue is in position now, you can't see whether you've got them worktops level. Mallet, chisel. What you do is you just feel your joint, make sure it's nice and flat. If you're happy with that, move away. If you're not happy with it, knock the piece that's raised down, or correspondingly knock the other piece up.
Tighten the jointing bolts and wait for the joint to dry. Don't be tempted to wipe away any excess with a tool or with your finger. Leave it to dry. When the new joint is completely dry, excess material can be removed by firstly using a block plane or a chisel where appropriate. Then finish with the orbital sander, going up through the grits starting at 150, then 180, finally 240, and then finish with a Scotch-Brite pad.
In some instances you'll need to put end caps on. There are two methods to do this. One is a plant-on method and the other one is an undermount method, both of which I'll be going through in this demonstration.
The plant-on method involves bonding a piece of 6mm material to the end of the worktop, which means that it adds 6mm to the overall dimension, so be aware of this. The method requires a clean, sharp edge in order to bond the 6mm material to. So we route off in one single cut a sharp edge using the straight edge guide shown here. Following routing, don't forget to derag the cut edge. Then using cleaning alcohol, clean the end cap and the cut edge surface. Remember to prepare the adhesive gun as we have done before, purging it and replacing the nozzle. The adhesive is applied to all surfaces. The end cap is then offered up, ensuring that an adequate amount of squeeze out occurs. It is then secured in place using 3-position clamps and finally secured using fibre tape. The undermount method requires cutting a rebate to accept the 6mm thick end cap material. This is done using a router and a straight edge as before, plunging in at least 3 steps to reveal the underlying material. The underlying material must be completely free of any chipboard residue in order to avoid unsightly brown residue lines in the finished piece. Following the rebating process, remember to derag the joint area. The end cap material must be milled straight and flat. Offer this up to the joint to ensure that you have no gaps. Clean the joint area with denatured alcohol on all surfaces, including the end cap material. Glue is now applied, squeeze out occurs, it is clamped into position, material tape is used on the end to pull the joint together, and it's secured with a 3-point clamp. When the joint is finished, it will look like this. The finishing of both edge methods is almost identical and starts with the use of a trimmer to remove excess material. For the undermounted method, a bottom bearing trimmer is used so that it runs along the edge of the material, keeping a nice clean line to the edging. This is then followed by the use of a 3mm round over piece to return the factory edge finish on both top and bottom as applicable, and then the use of the orbital sander going up through the grits. Be careful on the edge to keep the orbital sander as flat as possible, minimising the amount of time spent rounding over the edge, and then finally finish with a Scotch-Brite pad. The use of rounded corners and edging is a very common occurrence for base units and maybe for a breakfast bar. That's no problem, as Paul now goes on to describe.
This application has been designed to work with a 30mm collet. The collet is the guiding ring on the end of the router, and a 1/2-inch router bit, 2 flute or interchangeable blade. What we will be needing is a jig and the edging. The edging has been thermoformed into the shape of the desired curvature, and it has also got the curve to fit in where the collet guide goes. Position the jig in the required place. Remember, you are taking 6mm off, or whatever distance you choose, to the edge of the worktop to be replaced by 6mm. This is a plant-on method only. Because we're going into the surface here, what we don't want to do is create a little step or 3 steps. As you plunge down, you might not get the router in exactly the same place. You go down it again, you might step again. So the way to combat this is the way I'll demonstrate now. Now what we're going to do is just plunge as normal. We've already got the straight cut, so we don't have to worry about stepping. What we've got to do now is reverse into the post form from point A, then cut from point B. Now what we need to do is reverse into the post form, doing a single cut .
After machining, remember to derag the cut edge. Then we offer up the end cap material, checking for a really good tight fit. Then it's time for cleaning, gluing, and clamping. Finishing of the rounded edge is firstly achieved by trimming, then using the 3mm round over bit to restore the factory edge on the top, the bottom and the sides as needed, and then finally sanding with the orbital sander, going up through the grits as we have done before, remembering to keep the orbital sander flat against edges to minimise round over, and finally finishing off with a Scotch-Brite pad. Creating a right and left-handed edged breakfast bar is really simple using the jig. Firstly, mark along the edge of the jig on both sides, flip it over, and following the tram lines that you've already marked, align the edge of the jig at the other end against the worktop end. Check alignment of the tram lines you've already made. Mark the new position on both sides. This now becomes your guide to allow you to reposition the template at both right and left hand edges and perform the cuts as before.
Now what I've done is I've paired the curved edging on one side, dry fitted and taped. This is so I can now attach this one, mark and cut. Now that this piece has been cut, I'll offer this up to do a dry fit, make sure I'm happy with it, and we're ready to glue. In most kitchen installations it will require kitchen sinks or hobs to be installed. What I'm now going to do is I'm going to show you how to install a drop-in sink. Also with that I'll be showing you how to do an undermount sink and also how to do a cutout for a hob. First thing we do with a drop-in sink is position in the desired place. Now that we've marked out for the position of the sink, what we've now got to do is mark in 8mm for a new line for the sink to actually rest on. And what we'll also do is we'll put a guideline on, because that now is our cut line. As with normal worktops, Earthstone is no exception. There must be a radius on this inside. This is to stop any possibility of stress fractures occurring. This particular cutout I'm going to be using a drop saw. You could use a router. As with any hob or sink cutout, it must be sealed with a silicone. This is to prevent water ingress getting into the board that we've now exposed. The same type of principle applies when you're doing a hob cutout, but there is subtle differences as in protection of your worktop. We need a heat barrier. With the sink and the hob now done, now what I'll be demonstrating is how to do an undermount sink, which is different as in we are now going to be using two jigs, an upper and a lower, and if you're also aware there's a router support base. This is important because it will stop your router from tipping. We'll start by first of all using the top jig, lining it up with the front of the worktop, clamping in position. Now what we'll do is we'll centralise the router support. Now you can see the benefit of having this support for the router base. It stops you from doing that. It keeps the base perfectly flat all the way around the cutout. Now what we've got to do is we've got to create a roundover on this piece that we've just worked with. Two reasons for this. One, that is a sharp edge, it must be rounded off because we're doing an undermount. And the other one will become apparent when I put the second jig on, because if you don't put the radius on there, you've removed this material, you will not be able to put a radius on this once that chipboard has been removed. Right, now what we've got to do is we've got to take this down to a 240 finish, because once your sink's in position you won't be able to do this. Now to finish off on this round over with Scotch-Brite. If drainer grooves are required, now's the time to actually install your drainer grooves. because once your sink is fitted you'll have trouble sanding the grooves. Position your jig in the required position and clamp. The plunge depth on this router has been set to 3mm only. That is the maximum depth you need to go to for the drainer grooves. The router is a 25mm radius round over cutter. Now what we've got to do is we've got to recess the chipboard for the undermount sink to fit into. This is done by jig number 2, which fits underneath the worktop. Lined up with the front of the worktop again. This gives you equal distance all the way around. Now with the piece that we've already removed, what we'll do is reinsert this. Again, this acts as a router support so you don't tip. Got to set the router so it stops short of going all the way through the material. Obviously we need to be at the underside of the 6mm material, so this stops short of actually going through all the material. Now what we've got to do is just sand inside the slots to bring it up to the same finishes we've got on the outside. We put silicone on the ledge and on the chipboard, ready to insert the sink. On some installations, an upstand may be required. It's 13mm, whereas your worktops is 6mm acrylic. And the way you fix that to the wall, silicone at the back of the upstand and put a thin bead along the back of the worktop. Push back against the wall and in position. You may get a little bit of squeeze out at the front. This is easily wiped away with a finger or a corner piece. The waste material that you've took out from your cutout sink or your hob, don't be tempted to throw it in the back of your van or throw it in a skip. This is now your repair material if in the unlikelihood you've got to go back and to repair the worktop. So what I recommend, guys, take your scrap piece off, take your kickboard from underneath your units, place your scrap piece underneath your units, and when you come to do a repair, now you've got the same material as your worktop. Depending how deep the scratch is, if it's a relatively just a scuff, you can probably just get away with using a Scotch-Brite pad. But if like these scratches are relatively deep, it's no problem to the Earthstone product. All you do is a random orbital sander and go through your grits.